From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good Sunday afternoon. Welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Ashley Afonso. Politically, 2017 was a year filled with controversy, from a new president to Congress's inability to get any major legislation passed. Today on 22 News in Focus, we'll be taking a look at the year that was and what we can look forward to in 2018. We'll be talking with several members of the state's House of Representatives and Senate about issues in Massachusetts. Joining me first is Anthony Signoli, political consultant with A.L. Signoli Company. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
So first of all, let's talk about the year that was and everything that's been happening in Washington, D.C. A lot to talk about. Let's talk about some of the accomplishments of President Trump so far in his almost year in office.
Sure. You know, what you look at right now is that the political accomplishment is being able to hang on to that base, that 32 to 33% thereabouts of that Trump base within the party and from outside of the party, too. It exists amongst independents and some Democrats in certain states. He's been able to hang on to that piece. You know, when you take a look at what he's done, it's been pretty aggressive. You know, there's been a lot of trips, there's been a lot of things that he can be criticized for, but what's actually happened in Washington? No real follow-through, no attempted follow-through, but not a lot done on his key platform issues. And now as we look at tax reform, what the reality of that actually is going to be with this vote for people throughout the United States, you know, it remains to be seen as this year closes. What will Republicans be able to campaign on that the president has actually done or accomplished? What will Democrats be able to campaign against?
You mentioned President Trump's trips. Has he had more than a first-term president usually has at this point?
Yes and no. I mean, you look at the course of history and over the course of time, there are others who compete with him in that regard, who immediately got out, but the times were different. It was a situation where the president, with his bully pulpit, had an international need to go abroad, to work out deals and diplomacy in person, not just through his State Department or through the Secretary of State. So there's really, you know, those who may criticize as far as the trips are concerned, that criticism might be more so the weekends away and golf outings and whatnot. But when it comes to being out there, these trips have been significant. His last round through Asia, I mean, that was pretty astonishing. Whether you like him or don't like him, I don't think there's many people that would have been able to keep that pace and to make all those stops that he had. What's the outcome of all of those? We still don't know. That remains to be seen.
Okay, so do you think these trips are helping him in Washington?
Not so much in Washington, but it's helping him to look presidential. It's helping him to play the role, look the role, and perhaps be able to point back to those. And, you know, politics too often is perception and not reality. But in this particular instance, he'll be able to spin a lot of that going into 2018. I went out and I scored on a trade deal, or I went out and I met with the Chinese. I was face-to-face in Vietnam, etc., that type of thing. They can play with that. They can spin that if they'd like to. Is there any real value to it, you know, as far as Washington is concerned? Not a lot. This doesn't really matter to the members of the House, to the members of the United States Senate.
Okay, something a lot of Americans are confused about right now, the Russia investigation. Can you catch us up to speed on that?
You know, that is unique in this instance. The electorate wants an answer tomorrow. What's the appetite of the viewers, of the electorate, of the readers and whatnot that are out there who are watching this thing? They get more concerned about what really affects them, whether it be the price of gas, the price of milk, what's affecting them, their children, their grandchildren, education at home, whether that be in Oklahoma or California or in Florida. So this is important to a lot of people. But it's almost, given the length of time that it's taking, and it's going to take a lot more time, and given the fact that it's on multiple tracks, you know, there's a House Investigative Committee, there's the United States Senate, there's the Joint Committee, there's all of that going on, there's the media looking at what's happening and trying to unearth the reality, and then, of course, there's Mueller himself, the investigation that matters the most. You know, it will get done when it gets done. How it gets used in the 2018 elections by Democrats or Republicans is going to be interesting, but this is just one where you have to kind of sit back and watch and wait. This is, you could not write this. This is House of Cards on steroids. This actual, you know, the actual reality of what this is. And for a lot of us who have been involved with this for a long time, we think about this in terms of this is Russia. This is the probability of meddling. All of our intelligence agencies are saying this is the case. And I tend to think in historical terms of that. If John F. Kennedy were president, if Ronald Reagan were president, the other side of the aisle, how would they deal with or handle Russia, given the amazing battles and Cold War issues that both men had with Russia at that time?
Okay, let's talk now about the 2018 election. A lot of open seats, both at the state level and in Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, in Massachusetts, every member of the Massachusetts House and Senate is up for re-election, all 200 members. Every constitutional officer is up for re-election. And normally when there's a constitutional officer in place, the state auditor, the attorney general, they seldom get challenged. But one thing that we're all hearing about, and it's going to be interesting, I think, as far as the impact on bringing out votes, is that the longtime Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, is going to be challenged by Boston City Councilor Josh Zakim. You know, that's the office that's responsible for bringing out vote. So I think that's going to have an impact on the 2018 election turnout, especially given how dismal the turnout was in 2017. Western Massachusetts, across the entire state, turnout was so low in the municipal elections. You know, you've got the big race, Senator Warren running for re-election, and certainly it's a state race. She's running against Jeff Deal. He is a Republican. He's got an aggressive campaign going on. But Warren is more than just a statewide race. It's one that will get national attention because of her standing within Democratic circles, within the United States Senate, and is kind of one of the standard bearers right now for the Democrats. That'll be a big race to watch. And then, of course, the big local, the governor's race. We've got one of the most wildly popular governors and lieutenant governors for decades. Their numbers are in the 70s. But on any given Tuesday, it's like the NFL, any given Sunday. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and it can be a surprise. I always point to Tom Riley, the Democrat, the Attorney General, incumbent, Deval Patrick challenging him and beating him, and the difference in their numbers was gigantic when they began. Deval Patrick was at about 6 points. Tom Riley, I think, was at 47 points in favorability, and look at how that changed by the time of that primary. So anything could happen. There's three spirited Democrats vying for the nomination against Baker. There'll be a lot going on that the electorate can watch out, not to mention all the referendum campaigns, which are stunning in what they cover, from nurse to patient staffing ratios to raising the minimum wage to 15% for 2022. There's a lot happening out there.
It's still pretty far out, but what are some of your predictions for some of those bigger seats?
Well, you know, you always take a look at the money, you take a look at the organizations. You look at the organization of Charlie Baker and Karen Polito. You know, the secret weapon, I think, for the ticket is Karen Polito herself. When we look at his first run for governor, where he was not able to win, and you look at his second, she made a huge difference. She's just so energetic and aggressive, and she's everywhere. You know, it's hard to think that a sitting governor with this popularity could lose. His points right now would seem to make him the odds-on favorite for re-election. But again, what are those issues that are going to impact this race? In Greater Boston, where the larger part of the electorate is, they're going to be talking about things like the MBTA, DCF, what was promised on these by the Baker-Polito team, and what have they actually gotten done? Those issues and others will reign in Boston. It's hard to predict in a game like this. It would be hard to believe that United States Senator Elizabeth Warren would lose, you know, the United States Senate seat that she holds, given the national play that she gets, you know, where she stands on consumer affairs and the rest. But again, anything can happen on any day. And at this point, it's too early to prognosticate as to what may or may not actually happen. What I can say is I think the Secretary of State's race will have an impact on overall voter turnout. I think it's going to bring people out.
And speaking of Warren, there has been quite a bit of back and forth between her and President Trump just yesterday, or just Tuesday, comments from the two of them. Can we talk about that relationship
Absolutely,
there?
yeah. You know, two folks that don't like each other, obviously, completely juxtaposed. I think that her strong feelings against him are legitimate and heartfelt from that part. I think his are at the same time. But I think the president also knows that every time he attacks Elizabeth Warren, it's something that's helpful for his base. It fires them up. She's become the Ted Kennedy, what Ted Kennedy once was, you know, the liberal lion, the red meat, so to speak, to Republicans nationally. The Republicans raise money by attacking Elizabeth Warren. She's become that standard bearer. So the president knows when he goes after her, it's sure to be able to even distract from the issue of the day. And what was the big issue of the day when he did attack? And it's hard to defend what he had to say about her, especially in the setting with Native Americans standing next to him, you know, in the White House for a completely different reason than talking about Senator Warren. You know, what deflected on that day? Who, in fact, is or is not at the helm of the Consumer Protection Agency that Elizabeth Warren had a lot to do with putting in place in the first place. You know, so much of this comes down to what's real, what's not. We hear about fake news, but it's up to the voters out there. It's up to them to really do their homework to know who's telling them the truth or not, candidate-wise, and to find those media resources that are, you know, valuable and viable and that can verify for them what's actually going on and happening.
Okay, thanks, Tony. When we return, we'll be discussing this year's legislation from Beacon Hill. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the year in politics and what we can look forward to in 2018. Joining me now to discuss business from the state's House of Representatives are Brian Ash, representing the 2nd Hamden District, Michael Finn, representing the 6th Hamden District, and Carlos Gonzalez, representing the 10th Hamden District. Thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So quite a few things happening at the state level. Let's first talk about marijuana regulations. Last election, approved here in Massachusetts, but we still haven't been able to get it defined on retail. What's happening right now at the State House on this level?
So the Cannabis Control Commission is currently promulgating the regulations. In the legislation that we passed in the legislature, we gave them a lot of time to be able to get the regs up and running, and so they've been having meetings about what those regulations will look like, while also trying to figure out what the budget for the organization is going to look like. You know, we gave them a pretty Herculean task in trying to get that, you know, that marijuana legislation going.
Okay, when do we, in July, I believe, is the date, correct, that we expect to see retail stores opening?
And even though it you know, passed last year, I think it's our responsibility as legislators to make sure that it's done properly, safely, make sure all the regulations are in place, that we don't want to just pass it and then have it haphazardly, people start selling it. So I think we did our due diligence by setting up the committee to have the hearings and go through all the possible scenarios of what's best for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Okay, another big issue at the State House and also all across Massachusetts, opioid addiction. What's happening at Beacon Hill on that?
There's been a lot going on. You know, there's you know, the governor's task force has been going through, looking at what best practices there are, and interestingly enough, it's one of the things that's come up in a lot of the conversation is within the actual substance abuse field, there really isn't a lot of best practices that are followed, and so the governor's task force, along with the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Committee in the legislature, has been trying to look at, you know, what are those best practices to, you know, really to help prevent the continued use of opioids, and more importantly, try to save lives in the process.
A lot of this, you can't legislate the behavior, and that's part of the problem. We can legislate how we deal with drug dealers, how we, you know, what the penalties are. When it comes down to societal issue, and we have to make sure as a society we take it seriously and start educating kids at a young age the dangers of opioids, of all drugs.
As well as being proactive, I think it's important that we can not continue to incarcerate many folks that have addiction problems. And we're looking at different ways, and even on a local basis here in Hamden County, we're seeing the sheriff step up and look at different ways to be proactive to dealing with the opiate addiction that's impacting every community, every sector of our community in Western Mass and throughout the state.
And it was a delicate balance, too, when you really think about it. Like, while we're trying to address the opioid addiction problem, the crimes that are associated with that as well, you know, the legislature just took action on the criminal justice reform bill as well. And so, you know, it's really a balancing act where you're trying to really target those folks who are, you know, a plague on our society, and those folks who are addicted to, you know, to those drugs. And so it's really trying to strike a balance in the process.
Right, and punish the dealers as opposed to the users who need the help. And as you know, Representative Gonzalez mentioned, the sheriff's been very progressive, and I think around here we've been very progressive trying to treat those who have a substance abuse problem. But you know, it's a growing problem, and it's tough to stay ahead of.
When you go out into the community and talk to people in your different communities, is that one of the biggest issues they're worried about right now?
You know, for me, representing West Springfield, it is one of the biggest things. We have an organization known as the West Springfield Care Coalition. They're very active in the community. They're right on the front lines of educating the youth in the community. They're bringing in different speakers, different professionals in that world of substance abuse, and they're doing, you know, we're doing the best that we can with the resources that we have, and it's a constant challenge, but you know, it's one that I think that every community really needs to step up to.
Okay. Let's also talk about access to health care. Is that something that people in the community also say there isn't enough of?
Oh, absolutely. I think up there with the opioid and drug addiction, I think health care and jobs are probably the two biggest things that people, in, I'm assuming all of our districts, talk about, having access or having affordable health care.
So what needs to be done?
How long do we have?
Well, so, you know, when we talk about health care, especially in today's climate, one of the biggest things, and I know the previous speaker touched on it a little bit as well, is, you know, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is really stuck in a position right now where we're almost I don't want to use the word guessing at remedies, but that's really what we're trying to do, because there's a lot of unknown when it comes to what is the federal government going to do. The Commonwealth healthcare industry, the healthcare system that we have, is heavily reliant on federal resources and able for us to be able to do that job and provide the quality of healthcare that every citizen in the Commonwealth wants and expects. And so, you know, when we're looking at different healthcare legislation, you know, whether it be contraceptive care that was just passed, you know, giving women the right to access that without co-payments and everything like that. Like, well, as important as that one issue was and is, you know, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that literally the federal government has gone and stated openly and loudly that they're looking to undo the ACA, which is our system it predicates, and so, you know, we really have to, you know, be aware of what they're doing at all times before we can really, you know, react and adjust our own system. And
Massachusetts has been a leader in healthcare, and we voted down some legislations that would have removed many poor people that cannot or could not afford the health care if the changes were made, due to the situation that's happening in the federal level that keeps us guessing as to what's going to happen or how we can better budget for health care for our communities, because health care is a large segment of our budget, and we really need to tackle that. But we have to tackle it from the perspective of making sure that's affordable to everybody, but also looking to see what happens in the federal level.
And another thing that comes up when you talk about healthcare is also, you know, there's a constant, you know, systemic battle between the providers, the insurance companies. You know, one of the ballot questions that we're looking at is, you know, safe staffing when it comes to nurse ratios in the hospitals, and that's going to be, you know, a really, really big, I'd say, public battle. You know, trying to influence the vote one way or the other on that particular issue, and so that's something that, you know, we're constantly you know, hearing from different agencies and hospitals about, and so it's something that, you know, we're constantly taking a look at.
As things stand in Washington right now with tax reform, if it was to pass and go through, how would that impact us here in Massachusetts? What changes would residents see maybe immediately?
So it's kind of tough to, I don't want to speak for others, but you know, it's kind of tough when you really look at it. So there's a lot of discussion out there that it's going to hurt the middle class, and it's a big tax break for corporations now. And you know, until you really get into the details of the bill and see what finally passes, it'll be hard to, you know, really say. I do know that there's a lot of optimism from small business in the business sector, where, you know, they're saying, like, oh, you know, well, we're really being stymied by the legislation that's out there. You know, we're having a hard time to access capital. We're not being able to get, you know, skilled workers, and we need different grants for those types of things. And so, you know, I think that if it does pass, I'd like to see something that is beneficial for all. But, you know, from what the discussions that I've heard thus far, I'm not convinced that, you know, it will benefit, you know, all Americans.
And it is tough until you get into the nitty-gritty of it. You know, when it first comes out, you're really just seeing the surface level. So I think until you really get to the innards of what it's going to do, how it's going to impact our Commonwealth, how it's going to impact other states, if there's changes made, it's really it's too soon to see what it's going to do to the Commonwealth here.
Economists keep saying that the plan that's being projected out there now is going to hurt some communities, and I think in my district it's not going to be the best possible plan out there. So we need to look at what's in the detail, like everybody's talking about. However, I think the federal government right now needs to really get its act together.
And also on this topic, let's talk quickly about family medical leave. Any changes in Massachusetts coming to that anytime soon, maybe in the next year or so? We'll
be looking at that next year for sure. I know that's one of the things we'll be looking at health care over the next session when we go back in January. As far as what we're going to end up doing with it, I mean, it's probably too early to say right now.
And there is the push there. You know, they're looking to do the minimum wage, have that settled at the ballot box. You know, personally, I don't think that the ballot box is the right place to settle a lot of these significant policy ideas or, you know, discussions. But you know, the fact that, you know, we haven't been able to get a compromise thus far is, you know, I think what's prompting both sides to really, you know, push towards the ballot. So it'll be interesting to see which way that goes.
Yeah, and we need to really look at family medical leave, because this, you know, we have a lot of families that can take advantage of the programs, and I know some of the business community will have an issue with it, but I think it's something that we really have to have a strong stance on.
Okay. And we'll continue our conversation when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about with your state representatives about issues in Massachusetts. So let's now turn the conversation to some of the bills that each of you have either sponsored or co-sponsored and where they stand right now.
Brian?
No, Mike, you got this one. You've been taking the lead.
So one of the priorities that I've had this session is it's a bill regarding tourism destination marketing districts, and what it'll do is it'll allow organizations like the Greater Springfield Visitors and Convention Bureau to be able to have the funds necessary to go out across the United States and try to bring in different trade shows, so when that happens, it's a great economic engine for the local economies when those trade groups come in and they're spending their money and they're staying in our hotels and they're eating in our restaurants. And so it's one of the priorities that I've had for this session, and I think we're moving forward with the bill. It's been released from the initial committee and it's into third reading, so I'm very optimistic that it's going to be moving forward.
So, one of the things we're working on as a vice chair of Elder Affairs, home health care workers trying to get a fair wage. We're trying to push more and more. If people can stay at home and be cared for as opposed to going into a nursing home, obviously it's better for them, it's better for their families, but you want to be able to pay a fair wage so people can afford to do that. So that's something we're pushing strong for.
Okay, and where does that stand right now?
Well, we have to wait till next session till it comes back.
Okay.
Well, one of the bills that we talked about was the Criminal Justice Reform Act, and we were very proud to pass that bill, and it was to make sure that one of the amendments that I proposed was the amendment on the phone, high phone rates in prison system. And Hampden County has one of the lowest rates, but throughout the state, we have to really tackle that. And we have a study going on now, so we're looking at all the cost of phone rates to and from families and the cost of it and how it's impacting our families, especially our low-income families.
Okay, when you come back from winter recess, what are some of the things you'll be debating? We'll see.
I mean, right off the bat, as soon as we come back, it'll be the state budget. One of the things, people, they think of it as like, well, they're going to pass the budget, but it's a multi-month process. A lot of the priorities that each of us have are, we fight to get the language included into the state budget. And, quite honestly, higher education is always a top priority, elder affairs, I mean, just to name a few, but those are the, some of the, bigger points that I always look for.
And depending on the revenues that are coming in, either prior or when we get up to the budget season, depends, how much money there is in the budget, whether you have to make cuts. And like Rep. Finn said, every group has their priorities, every rep and senator has their priorities, and we have to, that's when you do a lot of negotiating and figure out what you can spend the money on, what you have to cut, and what you have to look for in the future.
Okay. With everyone up for re-election in 2018, are you all planning to run again?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, 3 yeses. So what are some of the issues you plan to run on for 2018?
Well, the same thing. We've all been in the House for a while now. You always have to look at your district, and employment's probably the biggest thing for most people because it's, what they need. And we've been blessed in the last few years that the unemployment rate has come down. But health care, as we talked about already, the opioid use, all the things that, that we've been talking about are things that are important to the people in our districts. And even though our districts are different, I think the priorities are pretty much the same.
As well as in my district, we have a little bit different than sometimes my colleagues, but I think it's important that economic development, job creation, and we have MGM in heart of downtown Springfield. How is that going to impact with jobs in our community, particularly in the 10th Hampden District and the Springfield area, as well as economic development opportunities. We talked about marijuana earlier, and how do we make sure that diversity is part of the economic equation for those folks that are going to be able to get the licenses. So we're tackling issues about economic development and job creation, particularly for a diverse community.
And for me, it's always, everything's always local. I'm a big proponent of local aid, making sure that our municipalities that I represent have the resources that they need, and that includes the Chapter 70 monies for our schools and the Chapter 90 monies to improve the roads. And those are the, the real bread and butter items that, I'm always contacted on. Like, there can never be enough local aid, I guess.
Okay, also talking about the ballot, you mentioned this a little bit before, but what are some of the questions you believe we will see on the ballot?
I mean, personally, when I look at that issue, I think that the nurse staffing ratio is going to be a real big one. I mentioned it earlier. The Mass Nurses Association has been very vocal about the fact that they feel that there should be minimum staffing numbers. And one of the things that's always surprising to me is, how little contact I've had from our local hospitals about that issue. I mean, something that's going to impact their bottom line as much as it will. you know, I would think that they'd be, you know, trying to get the ear of someone to hear their side of the story. And thus far, it's really been surprisingly quiet.
Yeah. The millionaire tax is going to come up, I would believe, and we all know that education is the key. And if we can invest those dollars into education, I think it's going to be better serve the state of Massachusetts and the residents of Massachusetts.
There's probably 20 or 30 potential ballot questions. I don't know how many will end up making it. Minimum wage will probably be up there as well. And I'm guessing probably a few others in there.
Okay. Now, something I know we've talked with you a lot on is not everyone, but many people coming up from Puerto Rico after the hurricane, coming into our community. What's going on with that right now, and what's being done at the state level to help these people?
Well, I think the governor's has put a team together to look at all impacts, how it's going to impact ourselves, particularly locally. Springfield is going to see a high growth of kids coming into the school system. You're already seeing that. I think there's a projected of over 200 right now. You have some of our hotels that have some residents that are here already looking for housing issues, so it's going to have an impact. But a lot of these folks are also eager and willing to work. So finding job placement and job assistance programs is going to be beneficial to them. And we're doing everything we can on a local basis. I know the mayor in the city of Springfield, Mayor Sarno, as well as in Holyoke, have welcome centers established, and they're looking at making it available to assist them with getting all the applications necessary for kids to go to school, employment opportunities, as well as health care, because I think that's very critical and important.
Okay, and you mentioned employment. That's another thing here in Massachusetts. We keep seeing that number go down, at least we have over the past year or so. What do you think has led to that?
I think the great work your legislators are doing pretty much is, there's a lot of factors. I think I mean, the economy has been getting better since probably for the last 10 years. It's slowly been getting better. I think we've made some key moves in the legislature to try to make business better in Massachusetts. And then we've, you know, Boston's obviously a thriving city, and we're trying to get Springfield back moving again, and we're hoping that MGM and some other things will really help even Western Mass get even better in the unemployment rate.
When you look at the job training programs that have been established throughout the years, I think it's been beneficial to prepare our workforce for the ability to obtain jobs, particularly our youth. And I think we need to have more investments in those areas to make sure that our youth are prepared well for a job, as well as educationally, and then be able to obtain the jobs that the future brings.
Yeah, and I would just say that, you know, I'd like to see Western Mass catch up to the eastern part of the state a little bit quicker. Some of the expanded gaming legislation that we voted on in 2011 was significant, and it brought MGM to downtown. The transportation bond bill that we had done, we tucked away language in there to make it so that the manufacturer would be producing the cars here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that's resulted in the Changchung Railroad facility up on Page Boulevard, I believe. And so, you know, there's been some good things, and as well as the overall state is doing, Western Mass is still, you know, lagging behind us, you know, to some degree. And so I think that, you know, one other area that we, you know, had a little forethought in was the fact that there's an initiative where the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce is partnering with the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce and the local chambers to kind of, you know, express, all right, well, here's some companies in Eastern Mass that have some manufacturing needs, and well, here's some businesses in Western Mass that can fulfill those needs, so let's keep that, you know, all that employment here in the state rather than farming it out. And so, you know, those are just some of the, you know, initiatives that, you know, I think have been beneficial to Western Mass while, you know, trying to harness a lot of that growth that you see out in the eastern part of the state.
Okay, thank you all for being here with us today. When we return, we'll find out what's happening in the state Senate. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the issues facing Massachusetts residents and the impact the legislation from the State House to improve life here in the Commonwealth. Joining me now are State Senators James Welch, a Democrat representing the Hampden District, and Donald Humison, a Republican representing the 2nd Hampden District and Hampshire District. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So a lot of the same questions for you guys, but let's talk about what's happening in the Senate now. So let's start with what are some of the pending bills that you think need to be addressed right now?
Well, we had a busy fall. We passed criminal justice reform and, of course, the Health Act, healthcare reform in the Senate. So those are pieces of legislation that we're sending over to the House that, hopefully the House took up criminal justice as well, but those are conference committee reports that will have to be worked on. And as we get into the new year, of course, the Senate budget, the state budget, which both the House and the Senate take up at differing terms or differing versions, and that's really a year-long process that takes a lot of preparation. And in December, we'll have the hearings that will try to determine the right appropriate amount of money that the Commonwealth will have to spend on the budget. So that'll be happening in December, but when we come back in January, state budget will really take up a lot of the time.
Yeah, the consensus revenue hearing has already been scheduled for December, and so we're going to hear from experts in the Treasurer's Office, experts, different economists from across our state will come down and talk to the legislators and the members of the Administration of Finance and the governor's team so that we can get a number to base our expected revenue off for next year's budget. And as the representative said earlier, we'll jump to it right in January. The governor will propose his budget early, and then the House and Senate Ways and Means Committees will begin doing our public hearings across the Commonwealth to listen to the input from voters and from advocacy groups, and they'll give us an idea of what they feel should be the Commonwealth's priorities in the new year. But next year is a shortened year because of an election season, so we'll have to do whatever legislation needs to be done as well as the state budget before the end of July. So it'll be a pretty packed year, and I think we've got a lot to do.
We touched on it a little bit in the last segment, but the budget, how long does it really take to get that passed?
Well, the legislative process takes, several months, but it really is a year-long process. You're constantly looking behind, and you're constantly looking ahead in terms of revenues and trying to make the best projections that you possibly can to ensure that we're only spending money in the state that we truly have. And because of Massachusetts, we have to pass a balanced budget. It really takes some fine-tuning and really does take quite a bit of negotiation to get to a certain point that we can pass a budget that we feel comfortable with, that is constitutionally viable, because again, we can only pass a budget that is completely in balance.
And before we broke for the holiday recess, even as recently as the beginning of November, the Senate was still taking up veto overrides that Governor Baker had made. So that took place over the course of a full year. Next year we'll only have until July to do that. But depending on how the revenues come in, it really makes a difference as far as what we chose to override or what we chose to sustain in the governor's vetoes, because obviously we can only spend what we have. And so there were a couple of months where we just weren't sure. Numbers were below revenue estimate from previous year. We weren't taking in the revenue that we expected to take in. And so I, for one, voted to sustain a number of Governor Baker's vetoes just because the money didn't appear to be there. Now, as we got closer to the end of our session this year, the revenues kind of came back up, and we're hopeful that through the holiday season will be a good sign, and that people will spend a lot and taxes will come in well, and that we'll go into the new calendar year with a lot of money in our coffers, so we'll be ready to face the new budget with a good with a good fiscal cushion.
Okay, let's talk now about health care. What are your thoughts on coverage here in Massachusetts if ACA is repealed?
Well, it's certainly something that we continually keep an eye on. The federal government, unfortunately, there's a great amount of instability in the federal government, especially involving health care. And the reality is there's 35, 36 states out there that did Medicaid expansion underneath the Affordable Care Act, and changes by the Trump administration, by Congress that are currently out there, or proposed changes, would drastically impact those states and how those states fund the coverage of their Medicaid patients or the Medicaid consumers. And if that were the case, that would mean potentially hundreds of millions of dollars that Massachusetts would no longer receive to help us cover our Medicaid population. So for that and that alone, we have to keep a close eye on what's going on in Washington. But at the same time, we just in the Senate passed health care cost containment reform, which is really the next step towards alleviating costs for businesses, for families, for individuals, and for the state, you know, here in Massachusetts. Because, you know, I think one of the major themes we hear from our constituents on a day in and day out basis is what can we do to make healthcare more affordable? Here in Massachusetts, we made the commitment. 98.5% of our residents are covered by health insurance, near universal coverage, best state in the country when it comes to that. And at the same time, our quality of healthcare is upper echelon as well. So we've maintained those 2 points, and now we have to address the issue of cost containment, which we are trying to do, and we have done through the Health Act here in the Senate.
On Beacon Hill, we've tried to do our job with an eye towards what's happening in Washington. That's been difficult for us because the conditions down in D.C. right now are so tumultuous, and so we're just not sure, you know, on a day-to-day basis, what's going to happen out of D.C. and what cuts will be made and how that will impact us back here in the Bay State. So we try to look at what is going on there. We also try to look at our own budget situations, and then we try to plan ahead as best as we possibly can. I think we're always concerned about health care for the disabled, health care for our elderly, of course, and the poor. And so we want to make sure that that is both affordable and accessible to people from across the Commonwealth, not just in the greater Boston area where healthcare is a huge industry and is also, as the chairman just said, you know, excellent quality of care. We both represent hospitals in our Senate districts. I have the Holyoke Medical Center, of course, in Holyoke, and Bay State Noble in the city of Westfield. And so we want to make sure that any votes we take, any actions that we do in Boston or that happen in Washington don't impact those facilities in a negative way, because they provide so much care for our constituents. And besides that, they're also a huge employer. They're very important for our economic base and our communities, and so it gets to be kind of complex as you try to go back and forth between healthcare bills and economic bills and workforce bills, because they all impact on the healthcare arena.
Okay, switching topics now to marijuana regulations. Some residents think that getting regulations for retail marijuana seems to be taking a while. What do you say to those people?
Well, we want to get it right. We created a system and put a commission in place to make sure that everything that we do, you only get one chance to get it right, and the first time is obviously for recreational marijuana coming up soon. So the reality is, you know, I'd rather take more time and get it right than do it fast and not, measure twice, cut once, right? But the reality is the commission is hard at work. They are certainly getting and diving right into the details. They're very well prepared, but at the same time they need the resources and be able to get caught up to speed on the recreational marijuana regulations, or at least the regulations that will be put into place. So more importantly, rather than the amount of time it takes, we got to make sure that we're going to do it right. It is coming. The regulations will be put in place, and I think the people in the Commonwealth will be happy with the way that Massachusetts approached it, by learning from other states, what other states did well, what other states didn't do so well. We've been able to learn from those states here in Massachusetts, and I think the public will be satisfied with the regulations that are proposed.
We saw the rollout a couple of years ago of medicinal marijuana and saw that didn't go well. In fact, it took the previous administration a lot longer than anybody anticipated to get that in place. And now that the vote has been taken by the citizens of the Commonwealth to implement recreational marijuana, I think that kind of throws a lot of what was done in the previous administration with medicinal marijuana kind of out the window. And so the chairman, again, is correct. We want to get it right. And I know that some of the advocates who really pushed the question or just wanted to be able to jump right into the new year and begin with having recreational marijuana available everywhere across the Commonwealth. But although the question passed, it didn't pass by a huge margin. It was still close. It's still controversial. There's still a lot of questions about how that availability of marijuana will be impacting our cities and towns and the quality of life. And I've already begun to hear from constituents of mine who just complained about things like people smoking it in the building where they live, and what can I do about that? And I had to tell them, unfortunately, now, because of the law that was passed by the voters, there's not much they can do. So they're impacted in that way, in a way that I don't think they ever even anticipated when they perhaps voted for the question last November. So the Cannabis Control Commission's got to get it right, and we've got to give them the time and the budget that they need to do that. I expect that we want to make sure that they do it sort of all at once instead of having us as the legislature come back and try to tinker with it time and time and time again. We heard repeatedly that people didn't want us to do that, and so we'd rather just give them the chance to get it right all at once.
Okay, we'll continue this conversation in just a moment. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been talking about the political climate in Washington and here in Massachusetts. So we are now talking with our state senators. Let's talk about what bills you have sponsored or co-sponsored in this past year and where they stand right now.
Well, the biggest one that I've been working on as chair of the Healthcare Finance Committee is the HEALTH Act, healthcare reform, cost containment legislation that we passed in the Senate a couple weeks ago. So that'll now go over to the House, and that will they'll do their own version most likely. May include some of the things that we had in the Senate version. May include some things that that are completely different. So once the House passes their edition or their version of healthcare cost reform, then it will go to a conference committee, hopefully sometime at, before we break, obviously next summer. To iron out the details and to pass a comprehensive package to send to the governor.
I just had, it's funny because a bill that I was very interested in, or an issue that I was interested in because it serves my district in Holyoke, but also all of us in Western Massachusetts, is the Holyoke Soldiers Home. And right before we broke, both the Senate and the House passed a bill that would, we're actually going to do it as part of a supplemental budget, but it actually became a standalone bill that we passed. The governor has already signed it, and it's to look at the capital needs of the future capital needs of the Holyoke Soldiers Home with an eye towards, hopefully the next bond bill, paying for improvements to the Soldiers Home. So we look at what deferred maintenance they have, and I'm sure there's a lot of it, and what capital needs they have there, and it's an old building. It's built in the 50s, so we know that there's a lot of capital needs. But the good news is that's something that we've been pushing, and it's done. So it's nice to be able to check some of those bills off. It's hard sometimes to get standalone legislation moved through committee and moved through the floor of both the House and Senate and get it done. It's nicer when we can do things in the state budget or as amendments through other pieces of legislation. But that's a great relief to have some attention supported by every member of the Senate, every member of the House, and it's something that the Soldiers Home has been asking for quite some time. So I'm very, very happy that that got done.
Okay, and you're both up for re-election. You plan on running again?
Yes.
I do.
Okay, 2 yeses. And what are some of the issues most important to you that you will get out to your communities?
Well, as always, the economy is very important, especially out here in Western Massachusetts. For those of us, obviously legislators, we spend quite a bit of time in Boston, and we see the economy and how well it's doing in the Boston area, and we'd really like to see the Western Mass area be able to really grab onto the not necessarily the coattails, but really see some of the benefit of the investment that's happening on the eastern part of the state happening here in Western Massachusetts. And we've seen quite a bit of that, but we have to keep the momentum going and continue to make the point for Western Massachusetts that the greater Springfield area is a place that businesses should come to, that they it's affordable housing, great schools, a wonderful way of life. Western Massachusetts is really a hidden gem when it comes to economic development here in Massachusetts.
I subscribe to the Tip O'Neill belief that all politics is local. I focus on the 11 communities that I represent in my Senate district, both the urban areas like Westfield and Chicopee and Holyoke, of course, and then the really the suburban and rural towns like Montgomery and Tallinn and Granville and Southwick. So there's a lot of diversity in those towns. I think Jim's right. I think jobs is very important. Economic development is important. We know that the quality of life here is good. We know that that's something that we already offer as a region of the Commonwealth. I think marketing our region to the rest of the state and even the rest of the country so that any economic development that would come in Massachusetts would look not just at the eastern region inside 495, but also from Worcester west, because we have a lot to offer, from our highly educated workforce to low housing costs and just a beautiful part of the state. Those are things that we're proud to run on every time, and we just have to make sure we not to let our own constituents forget that they have such a good thing going for them. I think sometimes it's easy to get down on ourselves because things aren't as good as we'd like them to be, but as Jim said, we're back and forth across the state all the time, and we know by comparison how good things are in Western Mass.
Okay, something one of your colleagues, Eric Lesser, has been pushing for is an east-west rail line.
Right.
What are your thoughts, both of your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm
you go
a
ahead.
co-sponsor of that. I've actually attended a lot of the events that Senator Lesser has put on. I think Jim has as well, and we believe that the studies should happen. It should have happened years ago. We don't know what the problem is or why it's taking so long. I think people need to know the answers to the questions about how much will it cost, what the true impact will be, what the benefit will be, and I believe we will derive a great benefit here in Western Massachusetts. We already see the infrastructure being improved, Union Station in Springfield and the like, and I think there's been frustration on the part of Senator Lesser, on our part, because we just see that this is something that should be done. This is something that we need to know the answers to, and that study will help us to determine really if it will be the benefit that we think it will be. So it should happen.
I agree. It's something that I think would be very beneficial to Western Massachusetts. What we have to do is continue to craft the message of how it'll benefit Eastern Massachusetts as well. There's two ends to the rail line, so we have to continue to push for and say that to our Eastern Mass counterparts that this will benefit you as well. And you know, again, as Senator Humison said, you know, finding out how much it would cost, finding how much you know, need and demand there is out there. But I do think when you do travel around Western Massachusetts, our constituents do think it's a good idea. But I do think that we need to make sure that if we are going to do it, we need to know how much it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it, and at the same time be able to do it in a way that you know, by the time it gets up and running, because we're talking about a pretty big project here, that we plan out for that time.
It was in the budget last year and then ultimately cut. Do you see it sticking in the budget this next coming year?
Well, we got it passed in the Senate. It didn't make it out through the conference process this year, and that was a surprise to a lot of us that expected it to go through conference again. Yeah, I think we're going to continue to push it until it sticks. The devil's always in the details, and there was a lot of questions with the issue of high-speed rail, and you know, how many stops and the cost of the tickets and how much it would be subsidized and how much time it would take to get from Western Mass to Eastern Mass. But those are all questions that are important to answer, and so we'll continue to work until we get that study and those questions are answered.
Okay, we'll have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been reviewing the political issues of 2017 and looking forward to what's next at the state legislature in 2018 and a preview of next year's elections. That's our program for today. We want to thank all of our guests for joining us and thank you at home for watching. If you missed any of it, you can watch it in full on our website, wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, we wish you a wonderful Sunday.